Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you. Thank you.
Good.
We're not going to talk directly about coronavirus to start. I'm sure there'll be something that we'll have to say a word or two, who knows what. But anyway, right now, I think of course, the biggest issue when you catch a word or two, you don't catch many words from the president,
no.
but he's very interested in the subject. But it seems like the people are very interested. And it used to be only, conservative, libertarian types might be entertaining serious thoughts about this. And of course, the issue has to do with the borders and immigration. And anytime Trump said anything, he was painted as the worst person in the world.
Yeah.
But it's around, it's getting worse, and there's not been a good policy design. I had a book a few years back, Liberty Defined, and one of the chapters had to do with immigration, and offered my 2 cents worth or a nickel's worth, who knows how much. But I found it's difficult to come up with a precise answer. Not so much that you can't design it in theory, but under today's conditions. See, I think the founders had to deal with it when we started a new country, and they had to have some rules and regulations, and it seemed to work reasonably well. We didn't have the influx of illegal immigration right now. Right now, people coming here, large numbers are coming in here, and they do this not legally. Some do, but most of them are coming in illegally, which raises a lot of question. But it's getting to be a very, very serious problem. And the argument is made, and I agree with it. When you want to come, if you were in a situation and living in some of these poor countries, I think so. But I think the people we have met along the way have come, and they've done it honestly. Or some of us have them in our families.
Yeah.
My grandfather was one. They
Yeah.
came in legally. But the other thing is there's a lot of poor people around the world. But most of the world right now, essentially the whole world, there's no one country that's really a free market, libertarian country that deals with problems like this with property rights and contract. That doesn't exist. But we are very wealthy. And I've argued the case that we're wealthier than we almost deserve to be because it's paid for by unearned wealth, and I'm implying debt and printing money, and the conditions are such that we are still, a very, very wealthy country. So they want to come. But I think what's going to finally get us to an end point is, when does the wealth run out? Because we're not becoming more free market oriented. We're just spending more and more and more inflation and hiding the facts and lying to the people, more likely to get into wars. So I don't think the prosperity is going to be still as attractive. But right now, it still is. There's still wealth, but I think the wealth will be consumed. And this whole issue is going to change. And but right now, there's still a lot of people who want to come because of the disaster around the world, and also because there's a large segment of individuals in this country, the anti-libertarians and the anti-free market people are, saying, well, it doesn't matter, just come, everything's for free, we'd like to have your vote, just please come in. And there's the doormat is out there, and they're welcome to come in. And that's a very strong attitude, but I think it's shifting. I think we're witnessing that right now, Daniel, where even the number of people supporting the Biden policy are shrinking, mainly because they've seen the riots in the streets, and they have seen lack of good results, and that maybe they're waking up and saying welfareism is not quite compatible for a graceful transition from an open border policy where everybody can come and consume what's left. And I think that's what we're facing. So help me find the perfect solution to this.
Well, I think like everything else in our society these days, the debate is framed along narrow partisan lines, and that's why people don't want to hear what we have to say for the large part, because if they're on Team R, you want to watch Fox and you want to watch those darn illegals, or if you're on Team D, you want to watch MSNBC and those poor humanitarian crisis. They don't want to look at it in deeper terms, what causes the crisis, what are real solutions. But as sort of a recap what's happened, and we can actually put up the first clip. This is the inauguration day, believe it or not, January 20th. Biden is starting to roll back Trump's Remain in Mexico program. The policy was, if you want to come over here, you can stay in Mexico while they look over your application. And this next picture, let's look at it really quick. This is what got everyone excited. These are the conditions that people who've come over the border illegally are staying in. Doesn't look super great at all, and that's got everyone excited. And then if you look at the next one, they're even losing Sheila Jackson-Lee on this, which if you're losing Sheila Jackson-Lee on something like this, you're in trouble. But the Republicans, Dr. Paul, as you know, they claim that this is a big plan by the Democrats to bring in a lot of Democrat voters. There's probably some truth to that, because if you come over here and the Democrats vote more free stuff for you, well, that sounds pretty good. If you can vote yourself more free stuff, who wouldn't do it? But the issue is a lot deeper, and I always sort of think of things in terms of foreign policy, because that's a lot of what I do. And think about the foreign policy contributions that Republicans never consider when they just want to close the border. Look at the drug war, which has destroyed these countries in South America, has corrupted their governments, has kept them from governing properly. Look at U.S. foreign policy and political manipulation of other countries. The coup in Honduras under Hillary, the coup in Bolivia under Trump. The U.S. was playing a deep role in these, destabilizing the countries. The countries that are continually destabilized by the U.S. are not capable of pursuing good, sound economic policies, even if they wanted to, because they're continuously arresting the last administration, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these factors aren't being discussed when they look at the problem.
One rule that I think is very apparent on what's happening right now, that the old saying is, if you subsidize something, you'll get more of it. Well, I would say that there's a pretty good subsidy for people who come here illegally. They're leaving bad conditions, and you've just described how we contribute to that with drug wars and sanctions and different things of that sort. But we subsidize it, and there's an economic cost. There's money involved. I mean, something has to money has to be spent, because nobody's going to just let people not have a place to stay. Right now they're staying in the streets. It's just a mess. But a lot of money is spent. And then if they get here, and then if they do get holding, the Democrats swear this isn't true, that people would, I think it might have been Cruz who got into trouble, that they get on welfare.
Yeah.
And I think they do.
Yeah.
So they will be. There is a cost, but one real benefit they come for, which is it's a little bit better than just coming, to get a handout, but that is to be part of the United States for the citizenship.
Yeah.
But you can't say anybody in the world that you've suffered, just come because we can absorb 50 million more people, who knows how many would come. So you can't do it. I don't think you can do it legally, because it violates, I think, the property rights of the people already here, because you have to steal more money from the people to pay the bills, or the people invade their property. And that essentially is it. They literally can invade your property. And like we've seen with some of the riots last year, that if you say, well, it's private property and you should defend your own property whether they're illegal or not. But it turns out that you can get into more trouble defending your own property. So it's not easy to offer the private property answer to this, because of the beliefs in and the support that socialism and welfarism get. So this is something that I think that you can't solve this problem. And Milton Friedman became famous because he said he wanted to argue that he was for open borders and more immigration, And I think he was right where he says it's so difficult and maybe impossible when you have a welfare state that automatically the costs skyrocket. But so I'm not a believer in open borders, but I think you can move in that direction. That could be a goal, because I think when the United States was started, we more or less introduced the notion, oh yes, the states are independent countries, sort of, but they were independent, and they wanted it so you could travel from state to state and trade from state to state. So in a way, we had a pretty good free market system and a free zone, but those conditions aren't there right now. Matter of fact, they're deteriorating because all of a sudden, because there's a little bit of a remnant of that, what we're getting are some people who are leaving California to come to Texas, and there's a little bit of voting with your boots on, just marching out.
Well, it's good that they're coming, but they just shouldn't bring California with them.
Yeah.
But of course, a lot in the left, the racial identity left, want to make this a racial issue, when in fact, and this is anecdotal, but certainly we both know immigrants from Mexico, and they're actually among the hardest border enforcers because they came here legally, so it's not necessarily an ethnic identity issue. But when we were talking before the show, you brought up the theoretical issue of an island with 5 people who landed on it. And I think that's kind of an interesting idea.
Yeah, I've tried to narrow it down to what it would be like if we had a libertarian country. You can't say you're going to do this and turn the United States into a libertarian country. I mean, it's just too impractical. But if you thought about a country developing in a group, and I guess I use the number 5, you have a certain size island, and you land and you declare ownership, and you get the ownership, and everybody owns 1/5. There wouldn't be any immigration board, because the owner of the land would decide. There could be agreements. The 5 owners could say, this is what you do, you should get permission, and have some agreements worked out. But you don't have to have a government, a centralized government, to determine that. And I think some people would have people come in and work for them and go by, and I guess on your property yourself, you can let people stay as long as they want. It would be defined by private property ownership, and that is a goal. It's theoretical, because right now we don't have many opportunities. People think along these terms, and there has been several times that you'll see that where people will get together. In the 70s, there was an individual that was dredging up an island in the Pacific, and to have a free country. But the neighbors got too close. 200 or 300 miles away, they came and took everything they were doing, so they never got their free country. So there's always the thugs, the authoritarians that can't stand the idea that there are people out there that would like to and be capable of taking care of themselves, and that's why you see the invitation, and the guard is let down, and the people say, well, I guess we have to have them take care of us and have the government get involved and make sure it's fair.
Yeah. Well, the problem, I think, with libertarian would say, the problem is that the spoils are too high. That's why the stakes are so high. The Republicans don't want more Democrat voters. The Democrats don't want less. They want more, voters, because the more voters you have, the more spoils you have, the more power you have. But should we move on to Pew, or do we have some more?
Let me mention one thing about this, that a motivation, and that's cultural Marxism, because I think that is real. I think the instigators have, a little bit insincerity. They're not the humanitarians they claim to be, and taking care of poor people and feed and clothe them and take care of them. They come because I think they know exactly what the reaction will be, and they like to see the chaos, because that's part of the whole goal of cultural Marxism. And this banning of books and all these rules and closing down churches and whatnot, they present so many things that make no sense whatsoever, except to them. If chaos is beneficial to them and invites support for a Marxist approach to government, then it makes a lot of sense. It's hard to believe, but I'm convinced there are people like that, and they don't start with a basic set of moral principles. I do believe that the founders of this country did have a better handle on moral principles than most people starting a new country.
Yes, absolutely. So let's move on then, because we want to cover another topic before we go. And let's bring up this next clip, because this is really important. We always like to look at research and look at polls. And this is the Pew organization that came to our attention from an article in FEE, Foundation for Economic Education. Many Americans continue to experience mental health difficulties as pandemic enters the second year. And this is some studies. This is the Index of Psychological Distress, and they asked different layers of society about their current mental state. And this is what was astonishing that jumped out, and Pew FEE pointed it out. 32% of young adults 18 to 29 years old reported, quote, high levels of psychological distress. 32%. An additional 31% reported medium level psychological distress. 45% of people under 30 reported being nervous, anxious, or on edge, at least occasionally. So we're basically in a situation where especially young Americans are literally losing their minds, not due to the COVID virus itself. And the FEE article points this out, because when you look at the numbers, the death rate for young people is extremely low, extremely low. It's not the virus. It's the lockdowns destroying the mental health of young people, young Americans.
You know, the lockdown has been the real problem, I believe. And when they started this, there were complaints, and we've heard stories like this. The children are very upset at school, and they can't do it, and they can't wear these masks and all. But this is a more detailed scientific study, and it was more deliberately done, and they're revealing how serious it really is. So it should add fuel to the fire of that. But you know, along with contribution to this and the prohibition about trying to get the kids to accept this is the fact that I think the cultural Marxists have been very successful in causing chaos and having such crazy things that they have to do. You know, the banning of kids' books and all this, not being allowed to go to church. But now they're talking, well, it's already started. You know, if you don't follow these rules and you fight it, you know, I don't like this mask, and it's not very. It's not. It doesn't save any lives. It's not beneficial. So if you argue your case for that, you're liable to lose your job. You could lose your jobs. What about even in college? Kids aren't going to college. You have your own experience with your son. They essentially miss out on getting to college. I have a grandson that's in medical school. He's almost finished his first year, and they don't have any labs. I think it's probably the first year you had a whole class of medical students that didn't do cadaver dissection. You know, it's crazy, and those things, you know, will sink in for a long time to come. And then the socialization of kids now instead of saying the kids do such and such and they have a good time and they let loose on Saturdays and all, what they're saying is when something happens where kids got together and a crowd got together to have music or go swimming. That's big news.
Yeah,
my goodness.
How dare they?
These kids made this decision. Oh, well, they were going to get into trouble, so we had to do something about that. So that's, it is a big problem. It is very socialized, and people are responding with psychological illnesses. This is something that will not go away. And a lot of people talk about a lost generation.
Yeah.
I don't think a whole generation can be lost, but I tell you what, it's going to affect a lot of kids, and gradually they're starting to open. But you know, even in our local area, look how slow they are at trying to get back to normal here in the schools. And it's this disruption and not knowing when it's going to end. You know, if a person, one time when I was very small, I think I was in about the 4th grade, I had all the childhood diseases at one time. I think my mother planned it that way. But I was at school for 6 weeks. Well, I can remember going back, and my mother talked to the teacher. How's he going to get caught up? And the teacher said, "Oh, he'll catch up. He'll be okay." And adapting to it and going back, I remember is a non-event.
Yeah.
You know, and they just that 6 week period, there were no grades. But that's not going to happen now.
No.
It's because it's different, and going back is not going to be the same, and there's going to be a lot of turmoil coming yet.
And even if these lockdowns were based in science, many would argue, and I think we would argue as well, that it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth the damage. But the fact is that there is no science to back the idea of a lockdown. Here's an article on ronpaulinstitute.org that we put up this morning, written by Rob Slane, who's great about this. He wrote a piece. Listen to this. I'll just read a little bit from it. You'll search in vain for pre-2020 medical and scientific literature advocating the mass quarantining of healthy people as an appropriate response to a pandemic. In fact, after a panicked Mexican government flirted with the idea for 5 days during the 2009 swine flu outbreak, ending it once it was realized how devastating it would be, the Director General of the World Health Organization, WHO, at the time, Dr. Margaret Chan, explicitly warned against such destructive measures being used. And here's what she said. In this regard, let me make a strong plea to countries to refrain from introducing measures that are economically and socially disruptive, yet have no scientific justification and bring no clear public health benefit. This is the world before 2020. You didn't do something like this, and now they've done it, and the cure is proving worse than the disease, literally and figuratively.
Because if you make the case for saying that the people who were expressing concern about lockdown, even then they say, well, you guys are a bunch of conspirators and you're off base and you're just causing trouble. But even now, there's more admission to the fact that the lockdown didn't do any good and it was more dangerous, than if you just took the chance on getting a virus. The whole thing is totally unnecessary. And when they study the different countries, the lockdowns didn't work. And the other thing that has come of this, the people who really support this whole thing about lockdown and don't say it, you're a bad guy, a conspiracy, come across as very arrogant. Those so-called leaders that get on TV all the time, they're very arrogant to think that their advice for a whole year, it couldn't be wrong. It couldn't be wrong. So therefore they have to mock and make fun of and punish, and they just bear down on it. They don't back off at all. They don't come up and say, we really made a serious mistake. We should have never had lockdown. Except the people the governors that didn't lock down and did much better, and there was less psychological damage and there was less economic damage, they're not feeling badly about it. They don't feel like they have to back down at all, because I think they're going to be considered that they were on the right track.
And the whole idea of stay home, stay safe was an absolute lie. And here's why. Actually, let's look at this next slide. This is the American Psychological Association. 1 year on, this is dated March 11th, 2021, 1 year on unhealthy weight gains, increased drinking reported by Americans coping with pandemic stress. A February Harris poll found that 61% of adults, Dr. Paul, experienced undesired weight changes. 10% of them had gained more than 50 pounds while in lockdown. So here's the idea. Stay home, stay safe means you can't go to the gym. You can't go out shopping. You sit home on your couch watching TV, drinking a bunch of liquor, and ordering food out that probably has a lot of additives and stuff you don't need. And it increases the morbidity. It actually makes people less healthy. And here's a recent study by the CDC itself. They looked at 148,494 adult COVID patients, and they found a much higher incidence of severe illness with COVID the higher the body mass index. So when all of these so-called experts told you to stay home and get fat, it actually is making you a lot sicker and more likely to die of COVID. If you are conspiracy-minded, you might wonder if that was part of the plan in the first place to jack those numbers up. Who knows?
But you're working on the assumption that some of these people who promoted this are thoughtful.
What was I
Anyway,
thinking?
consider that. So, but what if they're anywhere close to our suspicion that this is done deliberately, deliberately to cause chaos and cause this mess? But one thing is they don't really care. They're arrogant people. But the other thing is no matter how embarrassing it is, they have no shame. They don't, oh man, I'm a little bit embarrassed by this because I misled the people. They just buckle down and swear that you're the one that's evil, and they seem to have, they have in some ways grabbed the moral high ground because they're doing what is right and good, and they're taking care of sick people and all. But on a more positive note, Daniel, I think things are shifting. I think they're moving in our direction. I hope we can recover a little bit faster than a lot of people think we can, but I think we're better off now than we were a year ago when it was just starting. Yes, we could have stopped it back then if they'd have listened to reason, but they didn't listen. But where we are now, and then we had this terrible year of lockdowns and all this suffering, and it's still going on. When you look at some of the reports, and we'll probably on a later program talk about the side effects of the vaccines now and the blood clots that are forming on some of the vaccine, it's enough to scare you. I don't think the evidence is in on that yet, but that could be around for a long time about what the downside is. And people are having side effects. There's been a lot of reports sent to CDC, and the CDC's reporting them, but nobody talks about it on television. So I think this whole thing is that people have adapted to it, and I think some people don't mind it one bit, because if their goal is to undermine Western civilization and remake Western civilization, they're doing a pretty good job. But I don't know why we can't compete with them. They're burning the books, but there's no reason in the world under today's conditions that we can't print books faster than they can burn them, and we can use the internet still. That isn't completely gone. So I would say that there's every reason in the world that we have to remain optimistic. And the sole goal that I have in doing a program like this is to gather up new individuals, people who are willing to think differently and to accept the principles that liberty is a much better goal than Marxism.
That sounds good.
I'll wave my wand.
Yes, if only. Well, I'm going to end on a high note, but it's going to start in a low note, because the Israeli people have been absolutely treated abysmally by their government. They've been treated horribly. Something reminiscent of previous dark eras. They're forced to wear wristbands to show that they've been vaccinated. It's not yellow stars this time, it's wristbands. They are being forced, mandated vaccinations. They don't like it. People should always have choices, but they're not. Their government is extraordinarily oppressive, one of the most oppressive on earth, and they're suffering under this. But here's a good news story, and this shows that people can make a difference, Dr. Paul. Let's put up this last clip. Chris Rossini just sent it over to me before the show, and I wanted to put it up. This is in Israel. There was a young child on the plane. The child would not wear a mask. As usual, the plane, the airplane people, the authoritarians on the plane were trying to kick and drag the family out. Instead of just looking and jeering at them, every single passenger on that plane got up and walked out with that family. That kind of solidarity is what is going to turn things around. It was a small act, but very important.
And that made the point that a few weeks ago there was another case where nobody got up, and the family had to go. But maybe because it was written up by the people who were concerned and said what should have been done, maybe, to think you know exactly what you'll do under those circumstances. What if if you say you have to do this to make your point, what if there's two policemen there standing there with guns? You might say, well, maybe tomorrow I'll fight this battle. But no, I think that's great. We have to stand up to them. And when you get disgusted with it, because we have a better answer, I believe we're on, and should be seen as being on the moral high ground, because we're not authoritarians. We don't want to tell other people how to live. We don't want to tell them how to spend their money. And we don't want to tell other countries how to live and what to do, because it doesn't work. Just like Daniel explained so well, this stuff, lockdown doesn't work. And therefore, we have the pragmatic argument on our side, we have the moral argument on our side, we have the economic argument on our side, and you wonder why people go along with it. Because it's an illusion. They think that conditions are rocky, the government's already involved, and we have to get some help, and they fall the trap into it until it gets so bad. I've often used the example of, when do the people finally say enough is enough when it comes to foreign adventurism? And I think so much about the Middle East. We did our very best to try to stop that, and yet it lasted. We're still in Afghanistan, but people have shifted their minds to the point where they were super hawkish for going into Iraq, and now they're saying it was a terrible war. It was a stupid war. Most wars are very stupid wars, and therefore that's the reason why Daniel and I put a lot of time in the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, because those are our beliefs, and actually we believe it can be achieved. I don't think we're on autopilot to always do the wrong thing. I think the challenge of life is to say, figure it out, what is right and what is wrong, and what is good and what is evil, and there's a big difference. So it's not like the whole world has always made the right choices or always made the wrong choices, and I think the evidence is clearer now than ever before. I think the information age with the internet is such that people can learn and understand and find out what it's like to live in a free society and what a free society really means. And I think we should start by asking the question to ourselves, what should the role of government be in a free society? It should be the protection of liberty. And we can go from there, because people are more creative and understanding to solve their own problems. And that would be based on property rights and contracts. And just these things we were talking about today was constant violation of property rights and contracts. The government are authoritarians, they like it, and they have no guilt about it. So we have a responsibility just to do a better job of presenting the case for liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.